I almost missed it. Wedged between a utilities bill and a flyer for window replacements, the envelope felt out of place. Too elegant, too deliberate. Thick cream stock, edges trimmed in gold, no return address. My name, or rather my initials, RM, were written in a calligraphy so familiar it felt like a whisper from a ghost. 12 years. 12 years since anyone from that family had said my name without venom or silence. 12 years since I walked out that door with a suitcase full of clothes and a head full of questions that no one ever intended to answer. I turned the envelope over in my hand. Once. Twice. It was heavy. The kind of heavy that doesn't come from paper, but from memory. From knowing that something inside has the power to unravel everything you've worked so hard to rebuild. I wasn't going to open it. I told myself that as I set it on the counter, as I poured a cup of coffee, as I paced the kitchen pretending like my hands weren't itching to tear into it. But I did. Of course I did. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue and pretense, was a single folded card. Thick, embossed, expensive. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Camilla Grace Moore and Elias Daniel Marchand. I stared at it so long the gold lettering began to blur. Camilla, my sister, if that title even meant anything anymore. The wedding would be held at the Levere estate, the kind of venue that only appeared in bridal magazines and trust fund dreams. Crystal chandeliers, violin quartets, a guest list full of people who never once asked where I disappeared to, or worse, knew exactly what happened and chose to look away. There was no note, no explanation, no olive branch, just a time, a place, and two names written like they'd never stolen anything from me. I dropped into the kitchen chair, the card dangling between my fingers. Why now? Why invite me after more than a decade of silence? The last time I saw Camilla, she was 19 and smirking from the top of the staircase as Mom told me I was a liability. She didn't cry, she didn't argue, she didn't even say goodbye. Now she wanted me at her wedding? This wasn't an invitation. It was a performance, and they wanted me to play a part. I grabbed my phone and took a photo of the card. I wasn't sure why. Habit, maybe. Documentation. Proof that I wasn't hallucinating the cruelty. I stared at the senders' names again. Camilla Grace Moore. Elias Marchand. Wait. Marchand. The name hit like a cold slap. I knew him. We'd crossed paths years ago in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom when I was pitching early funding for my health tech startup. He was the youngest VP at some venture capital firm that specialized in innovative wellness. Polished, arrogant, the kind of man who shook your hand while already deciding whether you were worth his time. I remember him leaning back in his chair, all confidence and casual dismissal. "Your numbers are impressive," he'd said, tone flat, for someone at the beginning of their journey. Translation: "You're too young, too female, too inconvenient to take seriously." He hadn't remembered me. I could see it in his eyes that day. He saw a pitch, not a person, but I remembered him, and now he was marrying her. My gut twisted. This wasn't coincidence. My family doesn't do accidents. Every move is a strategy, every silence a calculation. They knew. They knew I'd remember him. They knew the name would land like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't a mistake. It was bait. And they didn't think I'd bite. But they forgot one thing. I'm not the girl they pushed out the door, not anymore. That girl cried for weeks in a basement apartment with one window and a mattress on the floor. That girl checked her phone every morning for messages that never came. That girl kept trying to prove she was worth loving. That girl died a long time ago. I stood slowly, walked to the window. The city skyline blinked through the glass, the lights of a world I had built from scratch. No one handed me anything. No one paved my path. And yet, here I stood, stronger, sharper, quiet enough to be underestimated. A flicker of something darker crept in. Resolve, maybe. Or rage polished into something colder. They wanted a performance. They'd get one. But not the kind they expected. My phone buzzed. "Jareth." "You okay?" I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Me. I'm going to the wedding." A pause. "Jareth. You sure?" No hesitation. "Me. It's time." I set the card down, walked to my closet, and pulled out the dress I'd been saving, the one that wasn't soft or sweet or subtle. Black, sleek, structured, not bridal. War ready. I ran my hand over the fabric, the power in its lines, the silent promise it carried. They invited me into their perfect little storybook ending. Time to remind them I was never just a footnote. People think families break in loud, dramatic moments, screaming matches, slamming doors, overturned furniture, but mine shattered in silence. Not a bang, a click, a whisper, a single decision that changed everything. It started with a necklace. My mother's diamond necklace. The one she wore only twice a year, once to the hospital gala, once on her birthday. It wasn't just jewelry. It was her, sharp, cold, valuable. She kept it locked away like a secret, until it went missing. I was 16. That afternoon, Camilla had left the curling iron on again, cord dangling off the edge of the vanity, a little glowing red light threatening to catch the whole house on fire. I found it by accident. I wasn't supposed to be in her room, but I went in to unplug it. That's all. 10 minutes later, our father's voice echoed through the house like thunder. "Where is it?" I didn't even know what it was until they brought me downstairs and laid out the empty velvet box like an exhibit. Camilla stood in the hallway, lips trembling, eyes wide and wet. "I don't know what happened. Rowena was in my room." My mother didn't ask questions. She didn't pause. She just stared at me like I was something she hadn't meant to birth. "You've always been selfish," she said coldly. "And now this." I tried to explain. The curling iron, the plug, the stupid light. But the more I spoke, the more their eyes hardened. My father's disappointment wasn't loud. It was worse. It was quiet. A subtle step back, a look like I was something sticky on his shoe. "They never found the necklace," I say aloud now, years later, standing in my apartment with that invitation still burning in the trash. Because it was never in my room. They didn't care. The moment the story fit, they ran with it. I wasn't grounded. I wasn't punished. I was erased. Dinner was silent. Camilla got a ride to school. I didn't. I wasn't invited to the hospital fundraiser. My mother told people I was taking some time for self-reflection. What they really meant was, "We've decided you no longer fit the picture." I remember standing in the upstairs hallway a few nights later. The house was dark, the kind of still that only comes after something irreversible. Camilla passed me in the hall. Her eyes didn't even meet mine, but she smiled. Smug. Victorious. Like she'd just won something and couldn't wait to unwrap it. That was the night I learned what mattered most in my family. Optics. Not truth, not trust. Image. Camilla played the part better. Polished. Camera ready. The golden child. And me? I was inconvenient, too blunt, too messy, too hard to control, so they wrote me out like a bad subplot. I tried to survive the rest of high school with my head down. No one said the words, but everyone knew. Friends stopped inviting me places. Teachers looked at me a little too long before handing back my papers. One day, my favorite English teacher asked if everything was okay at home. I lied. Of course I did. I was raised by people who considered silence a virtue. College was supposed to be my clean slate. I got into the state university on scholarship, barely, but I went. I thought distance would save me. That maybe, just maybe, I could outrun the shadows they'd thrown over me. But the shadows had reach. It started with whispers, side eyes, the way people pulled away in group projects. I didn't know why until my roommate shoved her phone in my face one morning. The real Rowena M., the girl who lies, steals, and plays the victim. No author, no proof, just venom. But I knew that tone. I'd heard it echo through marble hallways and velvet-draped dining rooms. It was Camilla. Maybe not the typing hands, but the voice? That was her. I tried to report it. The site wouldn't take it down. "No direct violation," they said. My inbox dried up. Internship opportunities vanished. A professor pulled me aside and said, "Perception matters in this field." I wanted to scream, but I'd already learned. Truth doesn't stand a chance when lies wear designer shoes. That post, it cost me a research grant, almost made me drop out. Camilla didn't just want to win. She needed me to lose, and I let her. I let them all win because I didn't have the energy to fight. I was 19, broke, invisible, scraping together credits and microwaving gas station burritos in a dorm microwave that stank like bleach and regret. Still, I finished. No support, no family, no applause. Just the stubborn flicker of something that refused to go out. And now? Now they wanted me back? Not with apologies, with an invitation. Like none of it ever happened. Like I hadn't spent a decade trying to claw my way out of a grave they dug for me while smiling for Christmas cards. But that's the thing about graves. Sometimes you grow roots in the dark. Sometimes you climb out stronger. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled down the old binder I kept hidden behind business books and startup manuals. It was dusty, bent at the edges, a relic from another life. Inside were the last remnants of the girl I used to be. Student essays, photos, even a printed copy of that anonymous blog post. I'd kept it not out of sentimentality, but strategy, proof, just in case. I slipped the wedding invitation into the first sleeve. One betrayal at a time, I'd start building the case. They wanted me gone. Now I was coming back, not for vengeance, for the truth, and I wouldn't be silent this time. It started with a name. Elias Marchand, the groom. The man whose signature dismissiveness had been branded into my memory from that boardroom years ago. I hadn't thought of him since that day until his name appeared next to my sister's like some cursed footnote in my invitation. And yet, the second I saw it, everything came rushing back. I remembered the glass conference table, the chill of the AC, the condescending nod he gave after flipping through my pitch deck like it bored him. "We typically invest in founders with more seasoned networks," he said, which was corporate speak for, "You don't know the right people and you don't look like someone who ever will." I walked out of that room with empty hands and a heavy heart, thinking maybe I hadn't earned it. Now I knew better, because Camilla had always known the right people, and now she was marrying one. I opened my laptop and typed his name into LinkedIn, then cross-searched him on Crunchbase, archived press releases, and even wedding registry blogs. Public people leave digital footprints, and Elias? His were perfectly polished. Too perfect. He hadn't just climbed the corporate ladder. He'd leapt up it like someone had greased the rungs for him. Multiple promotions, fast-track placements, executive roles at companies with direct ties to Moore Foundation Wellness, the nonprofit umbrella my family used as both shield and smokescreen. Connections everywhere, all roads circled back to them. I wasn't surprised. Not really. My family always knew how to plant their favorites in power, water them with wealth, and harvest whatever credibility they needed. Still, something wasn't adding up. I clicked into an archived article about Camilla's groundbreaking research on community-based health equity, a piece that had been featured in a respected science journal. Her glowing face beamed from the header, next to a quote about giving a voice to the underserved. I clicked into the article. My stomach dropped before I'd even finished the second paragraph. The phrasing, the premise, the entire framework. It wasn't just similar. It was mine. My thesis. The one I'd spent 8 months building from the ground up in college, using real community interviews, nutritional modeling, data visualizations I cried over at 3 a.m., word for word, scrubbed of my name, stamped with hers. The blood rushed to my ears. I pulled up my old documents from the cloud, cross-referencing line by line, the conclusions, the method, even the damn color scheme in the charts. There was no question. She hadn't just stolen my future. She'd used it to build her empire. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I should have cried. I should have screamed. But instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop. Folder name, Evidence. I dragged in the article, then my original thesis, then the time-stamped PDF logs from my old Google Drive account. This wasn't grief anymore. This was a case file. That night, I told Jareth. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't try to calm me down. He just handed me a glass of water, sat beside me, and said, "What do you need?" "Everything," I said. "Emails, interviews, public records, anything she ever put her name on." He nodded once. "We'll find it." That's what I loved about him. No ego, no disbelief, just action. The next morning, I started digging through old archives, student forums, financial aid records, public posts from faculty advisors. I found a list of past winners from the Women in Health Sciences Scholarship, Spring 2014. Winner, Camilla Grace Moore. A week after my research folder mysteriously vanished from the campus drive, it had been buried in a sea of polished announcements, university press coverage, and smiling photos of her holding a check under a banner that read, "Innovation, Integrity, Impact." The audacity. I downloaded everything, screenshot it all, and dropped it into the folder. Then I found the blog. I hadn't looked at it in years, assuming it had long since been deleted. But there it was, still online, still anonymous, still dripping with malice. She lies to professors. She manipulates sympathy. Ask her what happened to her mother's necklace. Her family never got it back. That last line sent a chill down my spine. It was too specific, too cruel. It wasn't some idle gossip. This was planted. And I knew by whom. Camilla didn't just smear me in private. She made sure strangers could question my name on command. I printed it. Tangible, unforgettable. More proof for the file. I added a sticky note. This wasn't sabotage. This was strategy. Jareth called later that evening. "We've got something." I sat up straight. "What?" "You remember Pacific Diagnostics?" The name rang a bell like a threat. "That's where the DNA report came from." He hesitated. "It shut down 3 years ago. Turns out it was a shell lab flagged for financial misconduct. No real staff, no oversight, just paperwork for hire." My breath caught. "You're telling me the DNA test?" "Was almost certainly fake." I closed my eyes. Who paid for it? $5,000, traced to a P.O. box registered under a holding company owned by, wait for it, Vivian Moore. My mother. Of course it was. She didn't just want to cut me out. She wanted to erase me, not just from the family photos, from the bloodline. She forged a lie clean enough that no one would question it. Because no one questions mothers with pearls and power. I opened a new Word document and began typing. Subject line, "I know about the test." Body. "I know what you did. I know it was a lie, and I'm done pretending to be the daughter you erased. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I saved it. Because now I had the first receipt. And I was just getting started. I didn't sleep. My body stayed still, tucked neatly beneath the duvet like I had somewhere safe to be, but my mind wouldn't shut up. It looped through fragments, Camilla's smirk, my mother's voice, the blinking cursor on the unsent email. At 4:12 a.m., I got up and sat by the window. Seattle shimmered beneath me, soaked in rain and neon. A city that hadn't known I was missing. A city that didn't care I'd been erased. But I cared. I pressed my fingers against the cold glass and whispered the question I hadn't said out loud in years. What if they never intended to let me back? Not just into the house, into the family, the future, the name. That DNA test wasn't a punishment. It was a declaration. I stood, walked to my desk, and opened the folder I'd been building. Screenshots, photos, blog posts, bank logs. Every betrayal laid out like a body count. Every lie now had a timestamp, a source. But the truth, I'd learned, is nothing without amplification. I needed someone who wouldn't flinch, someone who understood power, someone who wasn't afraid to strike a match inside a mansion full of gas. I opened my old contacts list and scrolled to the name I hadn't touched since I walked away from that last investigation. Becca Lane, freelance journalist, ruthless researcher. The kind of woman who'd cracked open wellness empires, exposed CEOs with God complexes, and smiled while they crumbled. She owed me a favor, but I wasn't calling in a debt. I was giving her a story. I started drafting the email carefully, clinically. Subject: Moore family, unpublished truth. Body Becca. You once told me if I ever came across a story worth burning bridges for, I should call you first. I'm calling. Attached, you'll find a partial timeline. Names, documents, and evidence of academic fraud, medical misconduct, financial shell games, and a falsified DNA test used to cut a legal heir from a family trust. This isn't revenge. This is proof. Let me know if you're still the kind of writer who tells stories no one else dares to print. R.M. I didn't send the whole folder, just enough to make her pulse quicken, just enough to say, this isn't gossip. This is gasoline. I hit send, then I waited and waited. 3 hours passed. Nothing. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Becca Lane. You just made my morning. When do we talk? I exhaled slowly. Not relief, not excitement. Readiness. That afternoon, I stood in front of my closet and stared at the dress again. The one I'd been saving. Sleek, black, made for sharp entrances and sharper exits. It wasn't just fabric. It was armor. I ran my fingers down the spine of it and whispered to myself, "You are not here for closure. You are here for clarity." My phone buzzed again. Becca, I read everything. You weren't erased. You were buried. And they made damn sure no one went digging. Then another message followed. Becca, tell me you're going to the wedding. I stared at the screen. Then I typed back, me. I wouldn't miss it. I arrived at Pike Place Market the next morning just after dawn. It was quiet, barely waking, crates slamming, vendors stretching open canopies, the air thick with the scent of tulips, coffee, and old memories. I needed to breathe where no one knew my name. But as I passed the flower stalls, a smell hit me harder than any headline ever could. Lilac, my mother's perfume. I turned so fast a vendor jumped. No one was there, of course. But that scent had lived in every room of my childhood, on every scarf, every pillow, every sharp word wrapped in silk. And suddenly, I was 16 again, alone, shivering in a hallway while Camilla smiled and my mother stared through me like I was a stain. My fingers curled into fists, not from fear, from memory, because every betrayal I'd buried had grown roots, and now I was learning to use them. Back at my apartment, I pulled up Camilla's online resume, the degree, the medical board listings, the speaking engagements, all beautifully curated, all pristine. But now I knew the cracks to look for. She'd used my thesis to win a scholarship, then used the credibility of that win to enter med school. But there was something else, a residency suspension. One line buried deep in an old alumni newsletter, a blip, no explanation, no follow-up. But something told me it mattered. People like Camilla don't disappear unless someone else pays for their silence. I texted Jareth. Me. Can you dig into Camilla's residency history? There's a gap around 2017. Feels wrong, he replied a minute later. Jareth. On it. Then added Jareth. This is more than just a wedding now, isn't it? I didn't answer, because we both already knew this wasn't about showing up in a dress and making a speech. This was war, silent, surgical, and I was done playing the role of the good daughter. Now I was writing my own part, and the curtain was about to rise. The email arrived just after midnight. No subject line, no sender name I recognized. But the sentence? It hit like a defibrillator to the chest. I remember you. You deserve to know what really happened with Camilla's suspension. My pulse kicked. I didn't breathe, just stared. Attached was a file, no title, no message. Just a digital folder containing a single PDF and a plain text note. I downloaded the contents into a secure vault, one Jareth had set up for moments exactly like this. Then I opened the PDF. It was an incident report. From a hospital, dated 2017. Patient, male, age 9. Diagnosis, mild asthma, overnight observation. Outcome, induced coma due to incorrect dosage of epinephrine. Attending physician, Camilla G. Moore. Status, case dismissed. No charges filed. I felt the blood drain from my face. I read the report again, slower this time. A child, a mistake, a coma. No follow-up, no accountability. Just silence, buried under clinical language and PR gloss. My hands trembled as I clicked open the text note that came with it. She wasn't supposed to be on the pediatric floor. Her rotation supervisor had flagged concerns weeks before, but someone pulled strings. It was covered up quickly, too quickly. I couldn't say anything then, but maybe you can now. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen like it might blink first. This wasn't about a stolen thesis anymore. This wasn't even about me. A child almost died, and Camilla walked away with her license intact, her future glowing brighter than ever, because someone, Vivian, had scrubbed it all clean. That was the real legacy of my family. Not wealth, not excellence, but erasure. They erased guilt. They erased blame. And they erased me. But they missed something. I kept the receipts. I encrypted everything and saved multiple backups. One in the cloud. One to a separate USB drive. One stored with Jareth's firm under an alias they'd never think to connect to me. And then, I moved. By noon the next day, 3 anonymous tips had landed in the inboxes of Seattle's most persistent health watchdog blogs, sources known for publishing what mainstream outlets were too polished to touch. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. I attached the report, the anonymous note, the medical credentials. I included a question I knew they wouldn't ignore. Why was a doctor with a suspended pediatric residency rehired without a formal hearing? Within 36 hours, the first headlines dropped. Local physician removed from pediatric center list after old incident resurfaces. More family heiress under review following anonymous tip about malpractice scandal. 2017 coma case tied to prominent medical family. Who knew and who covered it? I didn't comment, didn't forward, didn't text Camilla. I let the silence speak. Because when people like her fall, the louder sound isn't the scream. It's the gasp from the crowd. Jareth called me that night. They're scrubbing her profile, he said. Hospital page gone, LinkedIn edited, no pediatric references. But people noticed. It's spreading. I didn't speak. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Because I knew what came next. Now, the wedding wasn't just a family reunion. It was a stage. And Camilla? She was standing in the spotlight with cracked glass under her heels, and she didn't even know it. The next morning, I opened my inbox. New message. No greeting, just, tell me what you want. The sender? Vivian, my mother. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just control disguised as curiosity. I replied with one line. You don't get to decide what I want anymore. Then I blocked her, because she never wanted to hear me. She only ever wanted to contain me. But you can't put out a fire you pretended didn't exist. And now I was done smoldering. Now I was burning clean. Outside, Seattle was humming with fog and friction, like the whole city knew something was coming. I pulled the invitation from my drawer again. Camilla's wedding, the Grand Verité Hotel. Saturday, 4 p.m. Gold foil, no return address. I ran my fingers over the name one last time, then whispered, See you there? The air outside the Grand Verité was unnaturally still, like the city itself was holding its breath. Inside, strings played something expensive and forgettable. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated under crystal chandeliers. Everything looked perfect. Of course it did. My family didn't believe in apologies. They believed in appearances. But I didn't come here for reconciliation. I came to be seen. I stepped from the black car like I owned the pavement. Navy silk, backless, high neck, hair pinned up in a style sharp enough to cut. Not bridal, not soft, sovereign. As I crossed the marble lobby, heads turned. Not in recognition, in confusion. That was always their problem. They never expected I'd come back sharper than I left. I took the elevator up to the ballroom floor. My heels echoed in the hall like a countdown, my clutch in one hand, a manila folder in the other. Inside were the final pieces. Her lies, her resume, the incident report. Truth with teeth. The ballroom doors opened with a breathy hiss, and I stepped through. Conversations faltered. Eyes snapped toward me. My name rippled through the air in fractured whispers. Rowena. Vivian was the first to recover. Her hand twitched on her champagne flute, lips pursed so tight they nearly vanished. Her eyes flicked to the folder in my hand, then back to my face. Her smile didn't come. Good. She finally understood the war had arrived. Camilla stood near the stage, radiant in white satin and inherited confidence. But when she saw me, her expression faltered. A single crack across porcelain. And then there was him. Elias. His jaw clenched the moment his eyes met mine. Memory hit him like a car crash. Fast, sharp, undeniable. I took a slow step forward, then another, letting the silence stretch. No one moved to greet me. No one smiled, exactly as planned. I walked to the front row like I belonged there, because I did, and sat. I didn't look back. Dinner was served, speeches began. A blur of toasts and practiced laughter filled the room. Camilla's best friend took the mic, gushing about love and destiny, and how Camilla always knew where she was going. When she finished, the room applauded politely. I stood, gasps, like thunder muffled by velvet. "I'd like to say a few words," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was clear. Camilla's smile dropped like glass hitting tile. I walked to the mic, folder in hand, heels striking like punctuation. I turned to face the crowd. "To truth," I said, raising my glass. "And those who fake it." The silence was absolute. I turned to my sister. "Camilla," I said, voice even. "Where exactly did you earn your MD?" Her lips parted. No sound. Just a visible stammer, a flicker of panic behind her lashes. "I only ask," I continued, pulling the folder open, "because the transcript you submitted to the Health Advisory Board is curious." I handed it to Elias. He took it without a word, eyes scanning. "It claims you graduated with honors from Pacific University. Problem is, those course codes, they don't exist, and your final capstone, never submitted." I turned to the crowd. "Her GPA? Inflated. Her scholarship? One using research she didn't write. Mine, actually." Murmurs exploded into a roar. Camilla finally spoke, voice cracking. "This is insane! You're ruining everything." "No," I interrupted. "You did that. I just turned on the lights." Vivian stood, sharp, commanding, ready to reclaim control. "Enough of this, Rowena. If you had an ounce of class—" I cut her off with the precision of a scalpel. "Class? You forged a DNA test to disinherit your daughter. Sit down." Gasps. Genuine this time. Audible horror. I turned back to Camilla. "You put a child in a coma, Cam. You weren't ready, but they still handed you a license. Your suspension was covered up." But I uncovered it. Elias looked up at her slowly. "Is this true?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. He stepped back from her. "I defended you to everyone." His voice was low, shaking. Camilla reached for him. "Des, don't let her ruin this." "She didn't ruin it," he snapped. "You did." And then he walked out. No one followed, not even Vivian. Camilla stood frozen in the middle of her glittering ballroom, abandoned by the very silence she built her life on. I didn't stay for dessert. I didn't gloat. I walked out the way I came in, powerful, heels steady, heart quiet. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cold and clean. My phone buzzed. A voicemail. I didn't need to listen to know what it was. Vivian, her voice, tight with rage. I deleted it without opening it, because for the first time in years, the silence wasn't mine to carry. They built a glass house. I threw the first stone, and now they could hear the cracks. I didn't sleep that night either, but this time I didn't toss. I didn't pace. I didn't replay the moment or wonder what would come next. I just watched, from the couch, wrapped in a blanket I'd had since college, coffee cooling beside me. I watched the headlines roll in like slow-motion thunder. Camilla Moore's medical credentials under investigation. Whistleblower report, ties more family to forged academic records. Silence no more. Internal review launched at Bellevue Medical Board. By sunrise, her name had vanished from the hospital website. By noon, reporters had camped outside the Grand Verité, waiting for a statement that never came. Vivian didn't release a comment. She didn't post a family photo. She didn't host a fundraiser to redirect the narrative. She went dark, which said everything. And then came the part I hadn't expected. Gregory, my father. The man who once looked at me like I was a problem no prescription could fix. He showed up at my door at 3:42 p.m. on a Thursday, wearing the same tailored suit he always had, but looking smaller inside it. He didn't speak right away, didn't shout, didn't demand, just stood in the doorway holding a leather briefcase like it might shield him from the truth. "You know why I'm here?" he said. "I do." He stepped inside, eyes flicking to the framed photo on my entry table. Me and Jareth, barefoot on a beach, laughing like people who'd survived something. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "About the test, about the accounts. I didn't know." I raised an eyebrow. "But you didn't ask either." He swallowed. That landed. "You left me," I said, "because it was easier to believe I was wrong than admit she lied." "I believed your mother," he said. "I believed her because it kept the peace, because admitting the alternative meant I failed you." "You did," I replied, "but not by accident, by choice." He looked down. Silence stretched. Then he said the thing that almost cracked something in me. "I didn't know how to fix it." "You don't," I said. "You can't." He opened the briefcase. Inside, a manila folder, thicker than mine. Legal documents, tax records, asset breakdowns, financial damage control. "I'm cooperating with the investigation," he said. "Vivian thinks I'm protecting her. I'm not." I said nothing. Not because I didn't have words, but because some wounds don't close, they just stop bleeding. "I'm not here for forgiveness," he added. "I know I don't deserve it." "Then what do you want?" He looked at me, tired, honest. "For you to know you were right, even when none of us wanted to admit it." He left the folder. He left quietly, and he didn't ask me to keep his secrets. For once. The following week, the IRS issued an official statement. The Moore Foundation was under full audit. Then came the email from the medical board. Anonymous tips had escalated into a formal inquiry. Camilla's license was suspended pending review. I watched it all unfold, not gleefully, not vindictively, just watching, like someone observing a storm they didn't summon, but had known was coming for a long, long time. Vivian tried one last time. She showed up unannounced, all poise, all pearls, pretending like she still held the pen to the narrative. "You don't understand what you've done," she said, voice too tight to be calm. "I understand exactly what I've done," I said. "I stopped protecting people who never protected me." She stepped forward, tone sharp. "This isn't just about you. This is our family, our reputation. You've humiliated us." "No," I said, quiet, final. "You did that. I just made sure someone finally noticed." She shook her head. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," I said. "It makes me free." She didn't speak after that. She left, perfume trailing behind her like a threat. I didn't watch her go. I just shut the door and locked it. The next morning, I called Teresa, the nurse, the whistleblower. She picked up after 3 rings. "Thank you," I said. A pause. Then her voice, steady. "Someone had to speak up." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "They didn't expect it to be the sister." She laughed once. "Neither did they." I didn't owe her anything, but I sent her a thank you package anyway, anonymous. Just sunflowers and a single note. Some truths bloom later, but they still bloom. And just like that, the world was quiet. No interviews, no lawsuits, no more voicemails from blocked numbers. Just stillness. I sat on my balcony with a mug of coffee and a sunrise that didn't feel like a lie, and I realized This is what it feels like to breathe without holding your story in your chest like a loaded weapon. To exist without asking permission. To live without needing the people who once decided whether you were allowed to. 2 weeks later, my world was quiet. Not the eerie silence that used to come after an emotional collapse. Not the kind of silence that hummed with dread and waiting. This was different. This was peace. Sunlight streamed through the curtains that morning. It pooled across my hardwood floors like something sacred. I didn't rush to check emails. I didn't flinch at the sound of my phone. I didn't wonder who was waiting to rewrite my story. Because finally, for the first time in years, no one else was holding the pen. I padded barefoot into the kitchen. The kettle hissed low and slow. Coffee, toast, a quiet morning with no crisis hiding behind a headline. Is this what healing feels like? Not a thunderclap, not a spotlight, just a hum. I stepped out onto my balcony, the city stretching beneath me like a map I had redrawn. The skyline blinked its soft steel blues and grays, but the air? It was light. I sipped my coffee, robe tied loosely at the waist, and I let it in. No guilt, no fear, no family ghosts banging on the doors of my rib cage. Just air, just me. I still hadn't deleted Vivian's last voicemail. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe closure. Her voice crackled through the speaker, tight and venomous. You've humiliated us. You'll regret this. I don't know who you think you are, but you will answer for what you've done. No apology. Not even a whisper of one. Just the same old strategy. Spin the narrative, control the frame, weaponize guilt. But there was something new at the end. A crack in her voice. A pause that didn't sound rehearsed. Like pain. Or fear. Or maybe, just maybe, the beginning of recognition. I didn't replay it. I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of indifference. Because I didn't need her voice in my home. Not anymore. Camilla never called. Not a single text. No, are you happy now? No, why would you do this? I didn't expect one. Because people like Camilla only respond when they're still playing, and her game was over. Elias, however, surprised me. He sent one message. Just one. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I needed anything from him. I didn't. But because sometimes people do the wrong thing out of ignorance, and sometimes they know exactly what they're doing. And Elias? He'd been played too. I typed back, I know. I believe you, but I don't need anything from you anymore. That was it. And that was enough. Gregory's medical license was suspended. The Moore Foundation was frozen, pending federal investigation. Vivian disappeared from the public eye. No gala appearances, no charity boards, no features in Modern Air or Legacy Living. Camilla left the city, quietly, without a statement, without a trace. She'll resurface eventually, somewhere smaller. Somewhere she can rewrite the past without interference. But she won't rewrite mine. Not this time. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I witnessed. Because when people fall, it's easy to cheer. It's harder, and sometimes more powerful, to just watch. To stand there while the truth does its work. That evening, I went to dinner with Jareth. Just the two of us. Simple. Warm. He held my hand across the table, thumb brushing my knuckle. You did what no one else could, he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about what I did anymore. It was about who I became. Not just someone who survived. Someone who stepped back into the room they were thrown out of. And didn't beg for a seat at the table. She flipped the damn table over. I used to think justice had to look like punishment. Lawsuits, headlines, prison bars. But now I know something quieter. Something deeper. Sometimes justice looks like release. No longer carrying the weight of someone else's shame. No longer needing permission to breathe. No longer auditioning for love that always came with terms and conditions. Forgiveness? Maybe one day. But freedom? Freedom came first. And it tasted like coffee in the morning. It felt like sunlight on bare skin. It sounded like silence I didn't have to fill. If my story touched something in you, If you've ever been silenced, erased, or told you were too much, let this be your reminder. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to protect the ones who never protected you. You are allowed to speak, allowed to walk away,